At 9:47 a.m., October 14, 1943, First Lieutenant James Robert Callahan, 24 years old, 11 combat missions completed, sits in the left seat of a B-17G Flying Fortress, nicknamed Pennsylvania Steel, at 27,800 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Outside his cockpit window, 291 American bombers stretch across 40 miles of sky in tight combat box formations. Below them, the ball-bearing factories that produce 60% of Germany's precision bearings are about to receive 1,400 tons of high explosive ordnance. Callahan's hands rest on the control yoke. His oxygen mask hisses with each breath. The temperature outside reads minus 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Through breaks in the cloud cover 5 miles below, he can see the silver thread of the main river cutting through industrial haze. This is the second Schweinfurt raid in 3 months. The first raid lost 60 bombers. Every man on Pennsylvania Steel knows the statistics. 1 in 4 B-17s that enter German airspace over Schweinfurt doesn't come home. The mission objective is simple and brutal. Destroy Kugel Fischer, ball-bearing plant number 2, and the Vereinigte Kugellagerfabriken facility. These 2 factories alone supply bearings for every Panzer tank, every Messerschmitt fighter, every U-boat diesel engine in Hitler's war machine. Without these bearings, the German military grinds to a halt within months. Callahan's co-pilot, First Lieutenant Marcus Antonio DeLucci, 23 years old, calls out the approach timing. IP in 4 minutes. Bombardier reports sight on primary target. Pennsylvania Steel flies in the lead squadron's second element, tucked into a position called Purple Heart Corner by the crews. It's the sweet spot where German fighters concentrate their attacks, close enough to the formation leaders to draw fire, exposed enough on the flank to be vulnerable. The aircraft carries 4,000 pounds of incendiary and high explosive bombs in its belly. Fuel tanks hold 2,100 gallons of 100-octane aviation gasoline. The bomb bay doors hang open, waiting. At 9:51 a.m., the German flak begins. Black flowers of 88mm artillery shells bloom across the formation. Each explosion erupts with a velocity of 6,200 feet per second, hurling steel fragments the size of dinner plates through the air. Callahan feels Pennsylvania Steel buck and shudder as concussive waves hit the airframe. A shell detonates 40 feet off the right wing. Shrapnel punches through the aluminum skin with sounds like ball-peen hammers striking sheet metal. "Flak heavy," DeLucci reports, his voice steady despite the hammering. 288 guns estimated on the ground. The bombardier, Second Lieutenant William Francis Hendricks, 25 years old, lies prone in the nose section with his eye pressed to the Norden bomb site. Steady, steady. Bomb run, active, don't deviate. Callahan holds Pennsylvania Steel level, despite every instinct screaming to dive, to climb, to break formation. Breaking formation means isolation. Isolation means death. The statistics prove it. A lone B-17 survives an average of 11 minutes against concentrated fighter attack. At 9:53 a.m., Technical Sergeant Raymond Peter Romano, 26 years old, tail gunner, keys his intercom from the rear of the aircraft. His voice crackles with static and urgency. "Fighters, 6 o'clock level, FW-190s, 12 of them, coming in line abreast." The Focke-Wulf 190s hit the formation like sledgehammers. These aren't the careful, probing attacks of earlier raids. This is Sturmgruppe tactics. Heavily armored fighters pressing attacks to point-blank range, accepting casualties to guarantee kills. Each FW-190 carries 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. At convergence range of 200 yards, they unleash a combined weight of fire that can saw a bomber in half. Callahan watches a B-17 called Dixie Demon, 3 positions ahead, take a fighter attack through the cockpit. The entire nose section disintegrates in a spray of aluminum and glass. The bomber rolls inverted and begins the long death spiral toward Earth, trailing debris and human bodies. "Steady," Hendricks calls from the nose. 30 seconds to release. The formation tightens. Bomb bay doors gape open on 291 bombers. The FW-190s wheel and come again, this time in a head-on attack, the most dangerous geometry for both hunter and prey. Closure rate, 550 miles per hour. Time in the killing zone, 3 seconds. Pennsylvania Steel's top turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Donald James Pritchard, 24 years old, opens fire with his twin 50 caliber machine guns. The weapons hammer out 750 rounds per minute each, filling the aircraft with cordite smoke and the smell of hot metal. Spent brass cartridges cascade down through the fuselage, bouncing off bulkheads and crew members' boots. At 9:54 a.m., the bombs release. Callahan feels Pennsylvania Steel leap upward as 4,000 pounds drop free. Below, Schweinfurt begins to die. The formation banks left, beginning the long turn toward home, 300 miles of hostile airspace, every mile contested. That's when it happens. At 9:56 a.m., an FW-190, piloted by Oberleutnant Klaus Becker of Jagdgeschwader 1, executes a diving attack from 7 o'clock high, the blind spot where Pennsylvania Steel's defensive guns can't track. Becker's fighter carries a pair of 21-centimeter Werfer granate rockets under the wings, weapons designed specifically to break up bomber formations by creating air bursts of shrapnel. He fires both rockets from 100 yards. The first rocket misses, detonating 60 feet above Pennsylvania Steel in a black cloud of fragmentation. The second rocket does not miss. It strikes the horizontal stabilizer at the base of the tail section with the force of 90 pounds of high explosive. The explosion severs the entire tail assembly. Pennsylvania Steel's tail section, containing the tail gunner position, the vertical stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizers, the rudder, and the elevators, separates from the aircraft. It tumbles away through the sky in 3 major pieces. Technical Sergeant Raymond Romano dies instantly, his position obliterated by the rocket's direct impact. First Lieutenant James Callahan, at 9:57 a.m., suddenly controls an aircraft that should not be capable of controlled flight. The control yoke goes neutral in Callahan's hands. No resistance, no feedback. Pennsylvania Steel's nose drops 15 degrees, and the aircraft begins a slow, sickening roll to the right. "What happened?" DeLucci shouts, fighting his own control yoke. "I've got nothing! No elevator authority! No rudder!" Through the cockpit window, Callahan watches the formation sliding away as Pennsylvania Steel falls out of position. Without the tail section, the aircraft has no pitch control and no directional stability. The control surfaces that allow a pilot to climb, descend, or turn no longer exist. They're tumbling through the sky 27,000 feet above Nazi Germany, in an aircraft that violates every principle of aerodynamic stability. The physics are absolute. A conventional aircraft cannot maintain controlled flight without horizontal and vertical stabilizers. The tail section provides the counterbalancing force that keeps the nose from pitching down under the weight of the engines. It provides the weather vane effect that keeps the aircraft pointed in the direction of travel. Without these surfaces, Pennsylvania Steel should enter an unrecoverable spin within 30 seconds. But it doesn't. The aircraft wallows through the air, nose heavy and yawing 20 degrees right, but it doesn't spin. The 4 right R-1820 Cyclone engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, continue their steady thunder. The wings, intact and generating lift, keep Pennsylvania Steel airborne despite the massive structural failure. Staff Sergeant Eugene Lawrence Mitchell, 23 years old, the flight engineer positioned behind the pilots, unbuckles and moves to the cockpit to assess damage. He looks aft through the fuselage and sees daylight where the tail should be. The entire rear section terminates in a jagged wound of torn aluminum, exposed stringers, and severed control cables whipping in the 180-mile-per-hour slipstream. "Tail's gone," Mitchell reports, his voice flat with shock. "Complete separation. Romano's position is just gone." The intercom erupts with voices. Second Lieutenant William Hendricks from the nose. "What's our status? Are we staying with the formation?" Staff Sergeant Donald Pritchard from the top turret. "We're falling back. Fighters are circling." Staff Sergeant Robert Vincent Castellano, 25 years old, ball turret gunner, his voice tight with fear from his position in the belly turret. "Get me out of here. If we bail, I'm trapped." Technical Sergeant Michael Patrick O'Brien, 24 years old, radio operator. "I'm getting no response from Romano. Raymond, do you read?" Callahan keys the intercom override. "Romano's gone. Tail section is gone. Everyone else check in by position." The roll call comes. Hendricks, Bombardier, nose section, here. Second Lieutenant Thomas Edward Sullivan, 23 years old, navigator, here. Do we have any directional control at all? Pritchard, top turret, here. Castellano, ball turret, here, but I need out of this turret now. O'Brien, radio operator, here. Mitchell, flight engineer, here. Staff Sergeant Charles Henry Brennan, 26 years old, right waist gunner, here. Staff Sergeant David Paul Rutkowski, 24 years old, left waist gunner, here. DeLucci, here. 9 men accounted for, 1 dead. Pennsylvania Steel carries 8 souls through hostile sky in an aircraft missing its entire tail assembly. The immediate problem crystallizes. They cannot maintain formation altitude. Without elevator control, Callahan cannot arrest the slow descent. Pennsylvania Steel drops through 27,000 feet, then 26,500, falling at approximately 300 feet per minute. The formation continues climbing away, pulling toward 28,000 feet for the journey home. "We're alone," DeLucci states. "Fighters will be all over us in 2 minutes." If you want to see how Callahan's crew kept Pennsylvania Steel flying without a tail, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Callahan. The engineering problem is unprecedented. A B-17 maintains pitch stability through its horizontal stabilizers, the wing-like surfaces at the tail that counteract the nose-heavy tendency caused by the engines, mounted forward of the center of gravity. Without those stabilizers, the aircraft should pitch nose down into an accelerating dive. But Pennsylvania Steel isn't diving. It's descending in a controlled, if unstable, descent. Mitchell, the flight engineer, sees it first. "Trim tabs," he says. The elevator trim tabs were set for level flight. Even though the elevators are gone, the trim tab setting created a slight up elevator moment before separation. And the center of gravity. We dropped our bomb load. We're lighter in the nose than we should be. Callahan understands immediately. The bomber's weight distribution has shifted. With 4,000 pounds of bombs gone from the forward bomb bay and the tail section gone from the rear, Pennsylvania Steel's center of gravity has moved aft, closer to the point where it should be for stable flight without tail surfaces. It's not perfect. It's not safe, but it's keeping them in the air. Can we control it? DeLucci asks. Throttles, Callahan says, testing his theory. He advances the throttles on engines 1 and 2, the left wing engines, to 2200 RPM while reducing engines 3 and 4 to 1900 RPM. The differential thrust pulls Pennsylvania Steel's nose to the left, counteracting the rightward yaw. The aircraft responds. Slowly, clumsily, but it responds. Pitch control through power, Mitchell confirms. Increase all 4 throttles together. The nose comes up. Reduce power, nose drops. Asymmetric thrust handles yaw. It's not flying. It's controlled falling with attitude, adjustments, but it's enough to give them a chance. The temperature outside reads minus 51 degrees Fahrenheit at their current altitude of 25,800 feet. Wind speed, 85 knots from the northwest. Every minute, Pennsylvania Steel falls another 300 feet and drifts 1.7 miles east of course. At this rate, they'll be at 10,000 feet, where German fighters operate most effectively, in 52 minutes. And they're over the heart of Germany, 280 miles from friendly territory. At 10:02 a.m., the FW-190s return. 3 fighters break from their pursuit of the main formation and wheel back toward the crippled bomber. Oberleutnant Klaus Becker leads them, sensing the kill. A lone B-17, damaged and falling behind, represents a propaganda victory. Gun camera footage for the Wochenschau newsreels. Another cross painted on a fighter's fuselage. Staff Sergeant Charles Brennan in the right waist position spots them first. Fighters, 3 FW-190s, 4 o'clock high, starting their run. The defensive coordination begins. Without the tail guns, Pennsylvania Steel has lost 25% of its defensive firepower and its entire rear coverage. The remaining gunners must compensate. Pritchard in the top turret swings his guns aft. Castellano, finally extracted from the ball turret by Rutkowski and now manning the left waist gun, tracks the approaching fighters. Brennan shoulders his .50 caliber and waits for range. The lead FW-190 comes in from 4 o'clock level, exactly where the tail guns should interdict. Becker's fighter grows larger in the waist gunner's sights, wing cannons flickering with muzzle flash. His 20-millimeter rounds walk across Pennsylvania Steel's right wing, punching through aluminum with thunderclap impacts. Brennan opens fire at 400 yards. His tracers arc across the sky, arcing behind the fighter. He corrects, leading the target, and his next burst stitches across the FW-190's cowling. Smoke trails from the German fighter's engine, but Becker presses his attack to 150 yards before breaking off, his cannon rounds chewing through Pennsylvania Steel's fuselage. The second fighter attacks from 6 o'clock level, the killing position unopposed. His rounds hammer into the aircraft's center section. The radio equipment explodes in a shower of sparks and vacuum tubes. A 20-millimeter shell penetrates the fuselage 3 feet behind O'Brien's position, blowing a hole the size of a basketball through both sides of the aircraft. The slipstream screams through the openings, temperature inside the fuselage plummeting. The third fighter overshoots, his attack angle misjudged. Pennsylvania Steel shudders under the assault, but continues flying. Hydraulic fluid streams from perforated lines. The number 3 engine begins running rough, its RPM fluctuating. A fire warning light flickers on the instrument panel. Number 4 engine. Engine 4, fire, DeLucci calls, activating extinguisher. He pulls the fire suppression T-handle. CO2 floods the engine nacelle. The fire warnings. Light stays illuminated for 7 seconds, then extinguishes. But the engine is finished. Callahan feathers the propeller, reducing it to flat pitch to minimize drag. They're down to 3 engines. Pennsylvania Steel descends through 24,000 feet. At 10:08 a.m., Callahan establishes the reality for his crew. We cannot make England. We probably cannot make Allied lines. Our options are bail out over Germany and become POWs, or we try for Switzerland. Sullivan, the navigator, works his charts, despite the aircraft's yawing instability making drawing straight lines impossible. Switzerland is 290 miles southeast. Current heading puts us over Stuttgart in 40 minutes. If we turn south now, we might make Lake Constance and Swiss airspace before we're at minimum altitude. The mathematics are brutal. Pennsylvania Steel descends at 300 feet per minute on 3 engines. They're at 23,400 feet. Switzerland requires crossing the Alps, with peaks reaching 13,000 feet. They need to maintain at least 15,000 feet to clear the mountains. That gives them 8,400 feet to work with, 28 minutes before Switzerland becomes impossible. But turning south means flying deeper into Germany, away from the Allied formations and their protective fighter coverage. It means extended exposure to German interceptors and flak batteries. "How much fuel?" Callahan asks. Mitchell checks the gauges. 1,200 gallons remaining, but we're burning fuel 30% faster than cruise rate because we're using throttle for control. I estimate 90 minutes of flight time. 90 minutes. Switzerland is 110 minutes away at their current speed and descent rate. Callahan makes the decision. We go for Switzerland. Throttle back to maximum economy cruise. Mitchell, transfer all fuel to the outboard tanks. We need the weight distribution for stability. The aircraft banks into a slow, wallowing turn to the south. Without rudder control, the turn requires careful differential thrust, advancing left engines, retarding right engines, waiting for the nose to swing, then rebalancing power to stop the turn. The maneuver takes 4 minutes to execute what should take 30 seconds. At 10:14 a.m., they cross the Neckar River at 21,800 feet. Below, Stuttgart's industrial districts sprawl across the landscape. Flak batteries open fire, not the heavy 88mm guns, but the smaller 37mm automatic cannons designed for low-altitude defense. The shells reach up toward Pennsylvania Steel, detonating 1,000 feet below effective range. The gunners are firing anyway, hoping for a lucky hit. The crew settles into the strange rhythm of survival. Hendricks, no longer needed as bombardier, moves to the navigator position to help Sullivan with course corrections. Pritchard maintains watch from the top turret, scanning for fighters. The waist gunners, Castellano, Brennan, and Rutkowski, rotate between guns and damage control, using walk-around oxygen bottles to move through the fuselage. O'Brien attempts to restore radio function. The liaison set is destroyed, but the command radio might be salvageable. He works with frozen fingers, splicing wires by feel through heavy gloves, knowing that communication with Allied forces could mean the difference between internment in Switzerland and a funeral in Germany. At 10:27 a.m., Pennsylvania Steel descends through 18,500 feet over the Swabian Jura Highlands. The terrain below rises to meet them, forested ridges at 3,000 feet elevation, reducing their effective altitude advantage. Visibility extends to 40 miles in the crystal air. To the south, the Alps are visible as a white wall across the horizon. The number 2 engine begins to fail. Mitchell notices it first. A subtle roughness in the RPM, a slight decrease in manifold pressure. Engine 2 is running lean. Might be fuel flow issue, might be battle damage to the fuel lines. They cannot afford to lose another engine. Without number 2, they're down to engines 1 and 3, both on the left wing. The asymmetric thrust would make controlled flight nearly impossible. "Can you fix it?" Callahan asks. "I can try." Mitchell unbuckles and moves toward the bomb bay catwalk, carrying his walk-around oxygen bottle. The temperature in the unpressurized fuselage reads minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. He works without gloves. Impossible to manipulate the small fuel system valves with heavy mitts, accepting frostbite as the price of survival. The fuel transfer valve to engine 2 is partially closed, jammed by shrapnel damage. Mitchell forces it open with pliers, skinning his knuckles against frozen metal. The engine smooths out, RPM stabilizing. Mitchell's hands are white and numb when he returns to his position. At 10:41 a.m., the FW-190s return. 5 fighters this time, fresh from refueling and rearming at Augsburg Airfield. They've been vectored to the crippled bomber by ground controllers tracking Pennsylvania Steel's progress on Freya radar. The fighters approach from the south, cutting off the escape route to Switzerland. Staff Sergeant Donald Pritchard in the top turret sees them first. "Fighters! Dead ahead!" 5 FW-190s in finger 4 formation +1. The geometry is perfect for the German pilots. Pennsylvania Steel wallows toward them at 165 miles per hour, unable to maneuver effectively, bleeding altitude through 16 down 200 feet. The fighters split, 3 climbing to attack from above, 2 setting up for a head-on pass. Hendricks, positioned in the nose, shoulders the single 50 caliber machine gun in the nose socket. This is the most vulnerable position on a B-17. No armor, no protection, just plexiglass and aluminum between the bombardier and cannon shells traveling 2,800 feet per second. The 2 FW-190s bore in from 12 o'clock level. Closure rate, 510 miles per hour. Hendricks opens fire at 800 yards, his tracers reaching across the sky. The German pilots don't flinch. Their cannons spark at 600 yards. The universe becomes violence. 20 millimeter. Shells rip through Pennsylvania Steel's nose section. The plexiglass disintegrates. Instrument panels explode. A shell passes through the cockpit between Callahan and DeLucci, missing both pilots by 18 inches, and detonates against the armor plate behind the seats. Shrapnel peppers the cabin. Hendricks fires continuously, the 50 caliber hammering against his shoulder. 1 FW-190 breaks, left trailing smoke. A hit, possibly fatal. The second fighter pulls up 50 feet above Pennsylvania Steel's cockpit, so close Callahan can see the pilot's face. Then the fighter is gone, flashing past at 500 miles per hour. The top element attacks, 3 FW-190s, diving from 2,000 feet above, their attacks timed to converge simultaneously on the crippled bomber. Pritchard engages the lead fighter, his twin 50 calibers creating a cone of fire. The waist gunners track their targets, waiting for the precise moment when geometry and ballistics align. The lead fighter's rounds stitch across Pennsylvania Steel's left wing, severing fuel lines. Gasoline vapor mists in the slipstream. One tracer round could ignite the entire wing. The second fighter targets the cockpit. His rounds hammer into the instrument panel. The airspeed indicator explodes. The altimeter freezes at 15,100 feet. Hydraulic pressure drops to 0. DeLucci takes shrapnel in his left shoulder, a fragment the size of a dime punching through his flight suit and embedding in muscle. The third fighter misjudges his angle and overshoots without firing. Pennsylvania Steel survives the pass, but the cumulative damage is catastrophic. Number 1 engine is losing oil pressure. Number 2 engine is running rough again. The fuel vapor from the severed wing line creates an explosive atmosphere around the left wing. The cockpit instruments are 60% destroyed. They're flying blind, controlling the aircraft by feel and engine sound alone. At 10:47 a.m., at 14th and 200 feet over Ravensburg, the FW-190s withdraw. Not because they're low on ammunition, they have rounds remaining. Not because they're low on fuel, they can pursue for another 20 minutes. They withdraw because Pennsylvania Steel has crossed an invisible line. The Swiss border lies 31 miles ahead. German standing orders prohibit fighter attacks within 50 kilometers of Swiss airspace. The risk of accidentally violating Swiss neutrality and provoking an international incident outweighs the value of a single bomber kill. The FW-190s bank away to the north, leaving Pennsylvania Steel to its fate. The crew doesn't celebrate. They're too exhausted, too cold, too focused on survival. Callahan flies the aircraft by instinct now, the control yoke merely a prop for his hands. Power settings on 3 laboring engines determine their altitude, their heading, their speed. Sullivan plots their position by dead reckoning. They've lost too much altitude for accurate celestial navigation, and the landmarks below don't match his maps with sufficient precision. At 10:54 a.m., they cross into Swiss airspace at 12,800 feet. Below them, Lake Constance stretches across the border, a blue oval of neutral water between Germany and Switzerland. 4 Swiss Air Force fighters, American-built P-36 Hawks, marked with white crosses, rise to intercept, escorting Pennsylvania Steel deeper into neutral territory. The Swiss pilots make no attempt to communicate. Their orders are clear. Foreign military aircraft entering Swiss airspace will be forced to land. Resistance will be met with force. The Swiss fighters take positions on Pennsylvania Steel's wings, making the ultimatum clear. Callahan has no intention of resisting. His mission now is simple: find an airfield and land this wounded bird before altitude runs out or fuel starvation stops the engines. Sullivan identifies an option: Dubendorf Airfield, near Zurich, 47 miles southwest. The field has a 5,000-foot concrete runway, adequate for a B-17 under normal circumstances. But Pennsylvania Steel isn't normal. Without tail surfaces, without hydraulics, with 3 dying engines, a landing attempt might be suicide. The alternative is ordering his crew to bail out, letting them parachute into Swiss custody, while Callahan rides Pennsylvania Steel down alone. He doesn't consider it seriously. "We're landing at Dubendorf," Callahan announces on intercom. "Everyone to crash positions. Bombardier and navigator to the radio room. Gunners secure equipment and brace." At 11:08 a.m., Pennsylvania Steel begins its final approach. Dubendorf Airfield appears below at 11:14 a.m., a rectangular expanse of concrete and grass surrounded by Swiss Army positions. The control tower signals with a green flare. Permission to land granted. Swiss emergency crews stand by with foam trucks and ambulances. Callahan brings Pennsylvania Steel around in a wide, gentle descending turn. The aircraft has no functioning hydraulics, which means no conventional landing gear extension. Mitchell cranks down the main gear manually using the emergency hand pump. 720 revolutions of the crank handle, his shoulders burning with exhaustion. The main gear locks down with mechanical certainty. The nose gear is another problem. The manual extension system is damaged, jammed by battle damage. The nose wheel remains retracted. "Nose gear won't extend," Mitchell reports. "We're landing on the mains and the nose." A nose gear uplanding in a normal B-17 is manageable, uncomfortable, but survivable. In Pennsylvania steel, tailless, and barely controllable, it could be fatal. When the nose impacts, the sudden friction could pitch the aircraft forward, driving the propellers into the runway, cartwheeling the bomber across the field. DeLucci, his left shoulder stiff with coagulating blood, works the throttles with Callahan. They've developed an unspoken coordination. Over 90 minutes of flying this crippled aircraft, each man anticipating the other's actions, compensating for instability, maintaining the delicate balance of power that keeps them airborne. Airspeed 140, DeLucci calls, reading the one functioning instrument. Altitude approximately 800 feet. Pennsylvania steel descends toward the runway threshold. The Swiss fighters peel away, giving the bomber clear airspace. On the ground, emergency crews scramble to positions. At 500 feet, Callahan reduces power on all three engines, allowing the nose to drop. The aircraft settles into a steeper descent, the runway rising to meet them. He can see individual seams in the concrete. See the white threshold markings. See the faces of Swiss soldiers watching from the field perimeter. At 200 feet, he makes a critical decision. He will land long, touching down 1,500 feet past the threshold. This gives him maximum runway length for the rollout, crucial when brakes are the only way to stop, and the nose gear will act like a plow when it contacts pavement. At 100 feet, Pennsylvania steel crosses the runway threshold at 125 miles per hour. The main landing gear wheels are 8 feet above concrete. Callahan reduces power further, bleeding off airspeed, waiting for the exact moment when lift equals weight. At 11:17 a.m., the main wheels contact runway. The impact is hard but controlled. The landing gear struts compress, absorb the energy, rebound slightly. Pennsylvania steel rolls on 2 wheels, the tail section that doesn't exist creating no downward force on the rear of the aircraft. The nose section hangs in the air for 3 seconds, an eternity of uncertainty. Then physics takes over. Without tail weight, Pennsylvania steel's center of gravity pitches the nose down. The aircraft rotates forward around the main landing gear axis. The nose section drops, accelerating toward the runway. Impact. The nose hits concrete with a grinding screech of metal. The plexiglass nose cone shatters completely. The bombardier's compartment floor buckles upward. The forward fuselage crumples inward by 18 inches as the structure absorbs catastrophic compression forces. Hendricks and Sullivan, braced in the radio room, are thrown forward against their restraints. In the cockpit, Callahan and DeLucci are slammed against their shoulder harnesses as deceleration peaks at 4 Gs. The gunners in the waist section tumble forward into equipment and each other. Pennsylvania steel grinds down the runway on its main gear and its ruined nose, throwing sparks and aluminum fragments. The screeching vibration rattles every rivet in the airframe. Callahan stands on the brake pedals, applying maximum pressure, feeling the wheels lock and skid. The runway markers blur past, 2,000 feet remaining, then 2,500, then 1,000. At 850 feet from the runway's end, Pennsylvania steel stops. The sudden silence is deafening. The engines tick as they cool. The wind whistles through 1,000 shrapnel holes. Hydraulic fluid and fuel drip onto concrete. But they're down. They're alive. They're in neutral Switzerland. Callahan sits in the pilot's seat, hands still on the yaw control yoke, unable to move. DeLucci releases his harness with shaking hands. Behind them, the crew begins to stir. Groans of pain, gasps of relief. The sounds of men who've survived what should have killed them. Swiss Army personnel surround the aircraft within 90 seconds. soldiers with rifles, medics with stretchers, officers in pristine uniforms, staring at the wrecked bomber with expressions of amazement. They see a B-17 without a tail, nose destroyed, wings shredded, engines smoking. They see 9 men climbing out of the wreckage. The internment process begins immediately. Under international law, Switzerland must intern all military personnel and equipment from belligerent nations that enter Swiss territory. Callahan and his crew are no longer combatants. They're internees, prisoners of neutral custody. Swiss medics treat DeLucci's shoulder wound. The shrapnel is extracted, the wound cleaned and dressed. Hendricks has 2 broken ribs from the landing impact. Sullivan has a concussion. Castellano has severe frostbite on both hands. The remaining crew members have minor injuries, cuts, bruises, strained muscles. They're transported to Adelboden Internment Camp, a converted hotel in the Bernese Alps, 90 miles south of Dubendorf. The camp houses 1,473 Allied airmen, Americans, British, Canadians, all shot down over Germany and forced to land in Switzerland. The conditions are civilized. Adequate food, heated barracks, medical care, male privileges. It's not freedom, but it's not Stalag Lufthansa either. The crew of Pennsylvania Steel learns Romano fate from Swiss intelligence officers who examined the wreckage. The tail gunner died instantly when the rocket struck. No pain, no awareness. Gone before his mind could register the explosion. His body fell with the tail section, landing in a forest 17 miles southwest of Schweinfurt. German Wehrmacht units recovered the remains and buried them in the Schweinfurt military cemetery. Weeks pass. October becomes November, becomes December. Snow blankets the Alps. The crew settles into internment routine. Morning roll call, afternoon recreation, evening lectures from other internees about escape techniques and Allied progress in Italy. Some internees attempt escape, tunneling, forged papers, Swiss civilian cooperation. Some succeed, most don't. Callahan doesn't attempt escape. His shoulder wound, though superficial, damaged nerves that control fine motor function in his left hand. He can grip, but he cannot feel. This ends his career as a combat pilot. He knows it. DeLucci knows it. The crew knows it. They wait. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe ends. Adelboden Internment Camp erupts in celebration. Men weeping, cheering, singing, getting drunk on Swiss wine purchased from sympathetic guards. But surrender doesn't mean release. Switzerland maintains internment until formal repatriation agreements are signed. On June 22, 1945, 8 months after landing Pennsylvania, Steele, Callahan, and his crew board a train at Adelboden Station. The train travels north through Switzerland to Basel, then into France, then to Le Havre on the Channel coast. At Le Havre, they board a Liberty ship, USS Rockingham Victory, packed with 2,800 American soldiers, airmen, and sailors returning home. The ship reaches New York Harbor on July 4, 1945. Independence Day. The crew of Pennsylvania Steel stands at the rail watching the Statue of Liberty emerge from morning haze, watching the Manhattan skyline grow distinct, watching their country welcome them home. James Callahan returns to Altoona, Pennsylvania, to his wife Margaret and his 2-year-old daughter Sarah, whom he hasn't seen in 18 months. The Army Air Forces promotes him to captain and awards him the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement, keeping a catastrophically damaged aircraft flying for 90 minutes and saving 8 lives. He never flies again. The nerve damage in his left hand disqualifies him from pilot certification. He takes a position with Pennsylvania Railroad as a logistics coordinator, planning freight routes and managing equipment distribution. It's quiet work, groundwork, but it suits him. He's had enough of altitude. Marcus DeLucci returns to Brooklyn, New York, marries his childhood sweetheart Rosa, and operates his family's Italian restaurant in Red Hook for 42 years. He and Callahan exchange letters quarterly for the rest of their lives. Updates on children, grandchildren, health, memories of Pennsylvania steel. William Hendricks completes medical school at Northwestern University and establishes a family practice in Evanston, Illinois. He treats 3 generations of patients, never mentioning his 2 broken ribs or the day he fired a .50 caliber machine gun at fighters traveling 500 miles per hour. Thomas Sullivan earns a doctorate in mathematics from MIT and teaches calculus at Boston College for 37 years. His students never learned he navigated a bomber across hostile territory using dead reckoning and a watch. Eugene Mitchell opens an automotive repair shop in Detroit, Michigan. He specializes in impossible repairs, engines that won't start, transmissions everyone else declares finished. He fixes them all, remembering frozen fuel valves at 18,000 feet. Donald Pritchard returns to Tulsa, Oklahoma, joins the police department, and serves 31 years, retiring as a detective sergeant. He never fires his service weapon in the line of duty. He's seen enough of what bullets do to metal and flesh. Robert Castellano operates a fishing charter business in Galveston, Texas. He takes tourists after redfish and speckled trout. His frostbitten hands functional but forever sensitive to cold. Charles Brennan becomes an iron worker in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, building skyscrapers and bridges. He works at heights that would terrify most men, 600 feet above rivers, walking steel beams 12 inches wide. It doesn't frighten him. He's experienced actual fear. David Rutkowski earns a degree in engineering from Purdue University and designs manufacturing equipment for General Motors. His patents improve assembly line efficiency by 23%. He applies the same problem-solving he used at 15,000 feet over Germany. Assess the situation, use what you have, make it work. The crew holds reunions every 5 years, 1950 in Altoona, 1955 in Brooklyn, 1960 in Chicago. They drink beer, share photographs, remember Romano. They don't talk much about the flight itself. Men who've lived through such things rarely do. But they remain bound by those 90 minutes when survival depended on collective action, when 8 men worked as a single organism to defeat physics and circumstance. James Callahan dies in 1987 at age 68 of heart failure. His funeral in Altoona draws 7 old men, DeLucci, Hendricks, Sullivan, Mitchell, Pritchard, Castellano, Brennan, Rutkowski, who stand in the November rain remembering the day their pilot kept them alive when death was certain. Marcus DeLucci dies in 1994 at age 74. William Hendricks dies in 1999 at age 81. The others follow through the early 2000s, until only Rutkowski remains, the last survivor of Pennsylvania Steel's final flight. He dies in 2011 at age 90, the last man who can testify to what happened on October 14, 1943. Raymond Romano never came home. His body rests in Ardennes American Cemetery in Belgium. Plot D, row 17, grave 23, one of 5,329 American dead buried there. He was 26 years old. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about ordinary men facing impossible situations with nothing but improvisation and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure First Lieutenant James Robert Callahan and the crew of Pennsylvania Steel don't disappear into silence. Raymond Peter Romano died instantly when a rocket struck his position at 7,800 feet over Schweinfurt. He was 26 years old. He never came home. But the 8 men who survived carried his memory forward for 90 minutes over Nazi Germany, for 8 months in a Swiss internment camp, and for decades afterward in Altoona, Brooklyn, Chicago, Detroit, Tulsa, Galveston, Pittsburgh, and Indiana. And now through this story, his name lives on. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.